welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is 10 cards you should be putting in your Commander decks, episode 57. And we have a very interesting list this time. I really did end up making a list that a lot of these cards are specifically good with specific commanders, which that's how kind of this whole series started. Is I saw these cards that I thought worked really, really good specifically in certain scenarios or with certain commanders. And it just turns out that there's a lot of those in this list coincidentally. So starting out with Savage Summoning, 1 green mana instant. This spell can't be countered. That's a fantastic thing that a lot of people who hate those counter spells want to see printed on a card. The next creature spell you cast this turn can be cast as though it had flash. Very important. That spell can't be countered. That creature enters the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. This card is just doing so much. I recently just mentioned this in my Thrasta Underwhelming Commanders video because I thought, it's interesting to be able to cast Thrasta with flash because it is reduced by the amount of spells cast this turn. So if your opponent casts a couple of spells, then you cast Savage Summoning, that's another spell cast, then your commander's not going to cost very much at all, can't be countered, and also enters the battlefield with an additional counter on it. So that's fantastic. I think this guy's great in like a Damia deck or any deck where you have like an upkeep trigger and you're worried about your opponents removing your commander before you get that upkeep trigger, right? And that happens a lot in Damia decks because your opponent doesn't want to have you drawing a ton of cards, obviously. So just wait that one extra turn, cast your commander on the end step with Savage Summoning. Your opponents won't see it coming, right? They won't assume you have a Savage Summoning in your hand. And Damia, of course, isn't normally cast with flash. So you cast this, they can't counter it. They can't counter your commander as well. Then you'll untap on your turn and refill your hand again. I also thought this was a fantastic fit with a Jared Carthelian deck because one of the things that I think people overlook with that commander a little is when it enters the battlefield, you turn someone into a monarch and you can't be the monarch that turn. So on your turn, typically when you cast it, you can't immediately get the monarchy back. But if you cast Jared with flash on an opponent's turn, right? So you Savage Summoning, you cast it on their end step. That turn on their end step, you can't be the monarch, but when you untap on your turn, now you can. It's a new turn and you can immediately get that monarchy and start going to town with your Jared Carthelian. So I think it's a fantastic fit there, but you really could throw this in any deck and it's going to be helpful in casting your commander. Coming in at number 2 this week is the white version of this card. Coincidentally, these both sort of ended up in line. 1 white mana instant. The next creature card you play this turn can be played as though it had flash. Draw a card. So this is a cantrip. I mean, and even if you don't want to do this at all, this card just replaces itself. At the very least, you can just 1 white mana, draw a card, but just I can cast my commander with flash or any of my creatures. Casting your commander with flash is probably the most important one. So again, if you're not in green or if you're in white, maybe you're in white and green and you want them both, this is basically a white option. Maybe not quite as good as Savage Summoning because you're not getting all that other stuff, but this will just allow you to cast your commander with flash if you really want to be doing that. Coming in at number 3, Saving Grace. And this is a card that just seems very unassuming on its face, but I just think can be so good in so many different situations. 1 and a white enchantment aura, again with the flash. So we got 3 cards in a row here talking about flash. Enchant creature you control. Enchanted creature gets +0/+3. Okay, that's not bad, but the important part here is when Saving Grace enters the battlefield, all damage that would be dealt this turn to you and permanents you control is dealt to enchanted creature instead. That's really powerful ability, and there is a lot of different ways to use it. So again, going back to that Jared Carthelian deck, I've got 3 cards in a row here that I think go in a Jared Carthelian deck, right? If damage would be dealt to Jared Carthelian while you're the monarch, prevent that damage and put that many +1/+1 counters on it. So this is a great card in a Jared Carthelian deck because of course you're going to put it on your commander. Your opponents won't be expecting it because it's got flash. So you wait until they charge at you with that Craterhoof Behemoth attack, then you flash that in, and this turn, assuming you have the monarchy, all the damage that you would be dealt to you. So you just let your opponents go through with their damage. You don't bother with the blocks, and all that damage that would be dealt to you gets dealt to your Jared Carthelian instead, and it gets enormous. Also, because it is permanents you control, it can be used in a combat trick situation where you're attacking, your opponents declare blockers, and then you can flash this in and prevent the damage that would be dealt to your attacking creatures or your blocking creatures. Also, it is all damage, so it doesn't have to be used in combat at all. Your opponent opponent just cast a Blasphemous Act. You flash this in, put it on one of your creatures. Now all the 13 damage that is going to be dealt to all of your creatures is now going to be dealt to that one creature. Essentially, you're using that one creature to save all your other creatures. Again, in the Jared Carthelian deck, this is an absolutely bananas scenario. So again, I think this is an auto-include in that deck. But just 2 mana to save all your other creatures is fantastic. And if you happen to have maybe an indestructible commander, now your commander is going to be perfectly fine as well. In fact, again, if you have a deck with an indestructible commander, this seems like just an auto-include in that deck. So this card really, even though it doesn't seem like much, I think goes in a lot of decks. Coming in at number 4, a very interesting, very old card, Scarwood Bandits. 2 green, human rogue, 2/2. Has Forest Walk, and 2 and a green and tap. Unless an opponent pays 2, gain control of target artifact for as long as Scarwood Bandit remains on the battlefield. Very unusual card. It is a green card that is gaining control of artifacts. Now, of course, unless an opponent pays 2, so if you plan on gaining control of your opponent's artifact, you'll have to make sure they don't have the 2 mana open. You know, I guess any opponent can pay. This is a very politicsy card where you can try to gain control of opponent's artifact and they can maybe beg one of their other opponents to pay the 2 because any opponent can pay this. It's a very interesting card that way. I don't know where you play this exactly. It's just a very interesting, unique old card that I thought I would give it a mention because it has a very unique effect, especially in the colors that you're in. Coming in at number 5, another very old, very unique card in what it's doing, Scarab of the Unseen. 2 mana artifact. Tap, sacrifice Scarab of the Unseen. Return all auras attached to target permanent you own to their owner's hands. Draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. Very interesting card with a lot of different ways that you can use it. So, of course, the first way you can use this is if you're in an aura theme, right? Because this is returning auras attached to permanents you own. So I have a Rain Academy Chancellor deck. I could throw this in there, and if someone casting a board wipe and I'm going to lose all that stuff, you know, I have a couple of auras on my commander. Now, I mean, yes, my commander is going to die, but in response, I can tap this, return those auras to my hand, and draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So again, this replaces itself. It's never going to be a dead card. At the very least, this card is 2 mana draw a card. Not great, but it's never going to be a dead card. But you're also going to get the value, obviously, because you're going to be playing this in a deck where you have auras, you are going to get that value and the card draw as well. That Light Paws deck, and man, as I suspected, Light Paws is one of the most popular commanders from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. Very popular mono-white commander already. In fact, on EDH Rec, it is already the 2nd most popular mono-white commander in the entire format. And of course, you're dealing with lots of auras there, and this might be a great way. You know, one of the downsides of auras is you can lose a lot of value, right? You have 2 or 3 auras on a creature, that creature dies, the auras go to the graveyard as well. Mono-white does have some ways to deal with that, but this is another way to sort of save that value. But also the other interesting way to do this is if your opponent casts a Song of the Dryads or Imprisoned in the Moon on your commander and you're in like a mono red deck or something, this is a way to get around that, right? That is a permanent you own and you're returning all the auras attached to it to owner's hand. So if your opponent puts stuff on your permanents that you don't want on there, you can bounce it. I mean, it is temporary, but it is a solution. Also, control magic, right? Anything where your opponent is stealing your stuff with a control magic type of effect, this is a permanent you own. So they steal your commander, you obviously own it. You can bounce that control magic back to their hand and get your permanent back. So really is a lot of ways to use this card. I think it could find a lot of use in a lot of different decks. Coming in at number 6, Scapegoat. 1 white mana instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature. Turn any number of target creatures you control to owner's hand. This is a card that, you know, again, back in the day when I was buying lots of Stronghold boosters, I was cracking this open in packs all the time. I just always loved the art there. I thought it was super cool. Where Gerard thinks he's killed Volroth, but it's actually like a shapeshifter. Very cool art there. So this is a very unique card and very interesting one. I mean, you're sacrificing a creature, which can be good in a lot of situations. Return any number of target creatures you control to owner's hand. It's 1 mana, I save my whole board, right? Which can be really, really good. Someone cast a board wipe. Instead of losing your entire team, you're going to pay 1 mana sacrifice one of your creatures, and you get to return everything else to your hand so you can play it again in your turn. I think that's pretty good. I think a 1-mana instant, I save my whole board, can be pretty fantastic. I'm going to put this in my Denic deck, I think, because on top of the fact that I have a creature-heavy deck and I don't want to get blown out with a board wipe, I'm actually in a deck where I want to be sacrificing stuff, right? So I can use this to sacrifice my commander. If my Denic is in play and I want to sacrifice it so I can disturb it, I don't have to return anything to my hand. I can just 1 white mana, sacrifice my commander, return any number of creatures I control to owner's hand. I'm going to choose 0. I'm not going to choose anything. I'm just using this to sacrifice my commander so that I can disturb it from the graveyard. So it's also good there as well. Coming in at number 7, Scars of the Veteran. Another card that is very unassuming on its face, but I think can be really, really good in specific situations. 4 and a white instant. So 5-mana instants, kind of a lot. However, you may exile a white card from your hand rather than pay this spell's mana cost. And of course, a lot of people out there love the whole I cast things for free, my opponents don't see it coming. That's always great in a commander game. Prevent the next 7 damage that would be dealt to any target this turn. That's pretty good. You know, you can use this on yourself, right? If your opponent is about to kill you, you can just prevent 7 damage that would be dealt to you. And again, because you can possibly do it for free, it can be a life-saving situation. If it's a creature though, you put a +0/+1 counter on it for each 1 damage prevented this way at the beginning of the next end step. So you can be putting up to 7 +0/+1 counters on that creature. So all of that together, I think, makes this a very usable card. You can make your creature a lot bigger, have a bigger butt, right? You can just use this to prevent 7 damage to yourself and end up saving your own life, and you can do it for free. However, where I think this card is particularly good is in the big butts matter deck, like in Arcades, for example. Very popular commander in the format, of course. The most popular Bant commander, in fact, and of course, each creature you control with Defender assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. So, of course, putting the +0/+1 counters on your creatures is essentially like putting a +1/+1 counter on your creatures, right? 7 +1/+1 counters on a creature is really, really good, especially if you can do it for free on top of the damage you're preventing. So in an Arcades the Strategist deck, this can be extra good. In a Doran deck as well, right? That's another commander that is going to be dealing damage equal to toughness. So even if you just put this on your commander, right? Say you're preventing damage to your commander, putting up to 7 +0/+1 counters on your commander. Now your commander is an 0/12, which essentially means it's a 12/12, right? That's pretty darn good. So I think those 2 decks in particular, this card actually can be really good. Coming in at number 8, Scouring Glass. 3 white artifact. Tap, sacrifice Scouring Glass, destroy all permanents except for artifacts and lands. Activate only during your upkeep. I mean, this is just a great board wipe, and I don't think ever, maybe once seen this in a commander game, maybe. It just seems really fantastic if you're in an artifact theme in white. Actually has Shroom on the flavor text there, so hint there a little bit. I mean, I'm sure people have put this in their Shroom decks or in their whatever deck is doing white artifacts, even if you're like in a SRAM deck, right? Say you're in a SRAM deck and you're doing vehicles or equipment, either of those, because they're both artifacts. I think this is a great include. Yeah, it'll kill your commander, but it's going to be just such a huge advantage for you because you're going to be keeping all your equipment, all your vehicles, all your whatever mana rocks. Your opponents will keep their artifacts as well, of course, but you're probably going to have way more. So even in a mono white Voltron strategy where you might have lots and lots of equipment, just I board wipe, but I get to keep a lot more stuff than my opponents do, I think is a really huge advantage there. So I think this card should probably see a lot more play than it does. Coming in at number 9, another very interesting, very unique card that probably only fits into certain situations, Scouting Trek. 1 in a green sorcery. Search your library for any number of basic land cards. Reveal those cards, then shuffle and put them on top. So, whenever a card says any number, there is a lot of potential there, right? There's a lot of potential for chicanery. And, there is a couple of fringe ways that you can use this card. Obviously, if you just want to be drawing lots of lands, this will just put a bunch of lands on top of your library to guarantee you be drawing a land every turn. It could also work great in a Get Rog deck, maybe, because you have a discard outlet. You can just stack your library with lands on top, discard a land, draw a land, discard a land, right? You can just keep doing that over and over and over again and get into a loop. If you have a payoff there with the discarding, or if you just want lots of lands in your graveyard, it can be great. Combos really, really well with Treasure Hunt, right? Had a patron of mine do this to me in their Jadzi deck, which is actually the first time I ever played against that commander. 1 in a blue sorcery, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-land card. Put put all cards reveal this way into your hand. So if you scouting trek, put 20 basic lands on top of your library, then you treasure hunt, you will put all those lands into your hand, right? Because you're revealing cards until you reveal a non-land card, and the top 20 cards are all lands. So you're going to put 20 lands in your hand. 4 mana to put 20 lands in your hand, or 30 or however many you want. Pretty fantastic, I think. So again, there is some interesting combo potential there. I suppose another really fringe way to use this card is I take all the basic lands out of my deck, put them on top of my library, and then use a card that says reveal cards until you reveal a non-land card, put the rest on the bottom of your library. So it is a way, even though very fringe, it is a way to put all the lands on the bottom of your library so that you don't draw lands if you don't want to draw lands, right? So just a very interesting card. I always like to mention those cards that talk about doing any number of things because that puts no limitations on them, and there is a lot of shenanigans you can get into there. And speaking of getting into shenanigans, coming in at number 10, Sands of Time, 4 mana artifact. Each player skips their untap step. So of course, as soon as you see that, you already know you're going to have a very powerful effect. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player simultaneously untaps each tapped artifact, creature, and land they control, and taps each untapped artifact, creature, and land they control. Such a weird card. Now, when this card was printed, the game worked a little bit differently than it does now. So how this card affects the game is different. One of the things, for example, is with lands, okay? So of course we used to have mana burn. So if you had untapped lands at the start of your turn, you would have to tap those lands to this effect, or you could tap them in response, right? So this effect is about to happen. You tap your lands in response so that they will untap. But because you're putting mana into your mana pool, you will then get mana burn. Of course, there is no mana burn anymore, so you don't have to worry about that part. However, how are we going to take advantage of this, right? You could just throw this in your deck to sort of screw around with people. It is an interesting effect, believe me. The way this will work, it will sort of give creatures extra summoning sickness. I don't know how to describe it. You really have to see this card at work in a game to completely understand it. But you play your commander, right? So I play my commander. It doesn't have haste, like most creatures don't. I can't use it right away. And then on my next turn, on my upkeep, now my commander's untapped and I have to tap it. So now I'm out my commander another turn if I want to attack it or something like that, right? If you don't have a way to tap down your untapped stuff on your upkeep, that stuff will get tapped, right? Sands of Time is extra good in a deck where you want to be tapping down your stuff all the time, right? So if you have an effect like maybe an opposition or Glare of Subdual, one of those effects that allows you to tap down your own stuff, Sands of Time is extra good because on your upkeep, this will trigger, and in response, you'll tap down all your creatures and your artifacts or whatever, so that when this resolves, all your stuff untaps. So basically, you're going to get that normal untap step, and your opponents are not. Your opponents are really going to run into some issues here, right? It's not an issue with lands and mana rocks where you can just tap them down in response and then they'll untap. If something doesn't have a tap effect like most creatures don't, it's going to get tapped down, right? You're basically going to be able to use it every other turn. So this really can slow a lot of decks down and can be extra good for you if you can use it to your advantage, right? If you can do stuff during your upkeep, extra good as well, right? Because tapping all your lands and mana rocks on your upkeep so that you can cast, maybe, again, your commander has flash, you can cast it during your upkeep to use all that mana. And then after you've done so, everything untaps. And as I just mentioned in my commanders that I can't believe how unpopular they are, Thanos, this goes infinite, right? That's the one commander where this card is absolutely broken with, because with Thanos, of course, you can copy triggered abilities. And this is one of the interesting ways, one of the many interesting ways to use that commander. I'm actually considering making a Thanos deck because I can't believe how unpopular it is. And I think there's a lot of fun things you can do with it. This is one of them. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player is going to untap all their stuff. You can copy this ability with your commander, with your Thanos, because it's a triggered ability. So it's going to happen twice. And when it resolves the first time, of course, you're going to untap your commander, right? Your Thanos is untapping. And assuming you have at least 2 mana to put into your commander's ability, which you should be able to do because everything's untapping, you're going to do it again. So this infinitely untaps all your stuff over and over and over again, which you can use in a lot of different ways. If you have a pinger, you win the game, right? If you have a creature, for example, that deals 1 damage to any target, That's going to keep on tapping, and you can keep tapping it and kill everyone at the table. If you want infinite mana, you have infinite mana because all your mana rocks and lands will keep on tapping. Obviously, if you get infinite untaps, it has to be during your upkeep, of course, right? That is important. But getting infinite untaps, obviously, there's a lot you can do there, right? So that's an interesting thing you can do with Thanos as well if you're thinking of possibly building that deck. But that is it for today. That is 10 more cards you should be putting in your commander decks. And if you are thinking of purchasing any of these cards, I do have a TCG Player link. It is in the description below. Feel free to give it a click. It helps support the channel. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.